The next part of the BFG is called the Blood Butler. And if we remember, they were talking about Schnoz Cumbers. And then they were talking about his talking. And he was saying he wasn't trained in how to speak correctly. And Sophie told him that she thought that he spoke very well. And she loved listening to him speak. And that meant a lot to him. He really liked that. She was also telling him that maybe he should try to find something better for them to eat. Do we remember all this? Okay, well, I'm excited about this next chapter. It sounds like it might be kind of scary. If you remember the Blood Butler, that was one of those big giants. One of the bone-crunching giants that are scary and like to eat people. Suddenly, a tremendous thumping noise came from outside the cave entrance, and a voice like thunder shouted, "Runt! Is you there, Runt? I is hearing you jabbling. Who is you jabbling to, Runt?" "Look out!" cried the BFG. "It is the Blood Butler." But before he had finished speaking, the stone was rolled aside, and a 50-foot giant more than twice as tall and wide as the BFG came striding into the cave. He was naked except for a dirty little piece of cloth around his bottom. Sophie was on the tabletop. The enormous, partly eaten Schnoz Cumber was lying near her. She ducked behind it. The creature came clumping into the cave and stood towering over the BFG. "Who was you jabbling to in here just now?" he boomed. "I is jabbling to myself," the BFG answered. "Piffle fizz!" shouted the Blood Butler. "Bugs wallop!" he boomed. "You is talking to a human being." "That is what I is thinking." "No, no," cried the BFG. "Yos, yos," boomed the Blood Butler. "I is guessing you snatched away a human being and brought it back to your bungle hole as a pet. So now I is winking it and guzzling it as extra snacks before my supper." The poor BFG was very nervous. "There is no one in here," he stammered. "Well, why don't you leave me alone?" The Blood Butler pointed a finger as large as a tree trunk at the BFG. "Runty little scum screwer," he shouted. "Piffling little squish figgler, squimpy little bottle wart, prunty little pogswiller. I is now going to search the primroses." He grabbed the BFG by the arm, "and you is going to help me do it. Us together is going to winkle out this tasteful little human being," he shouted. The BFG had intended to whisk Sophie off the table as soon as he got the chance and hide her behind his back, but now there was no hope in doing this. Sophie peered around the chewed-off end of the enormous Schnoz Cumber, watching the two giants as they moved away down the cave. The Blood Butler was a gruesome sight. His skin was reddish pink. There was black hair sprouting on his chest and arms and on his stomach. The hair on his head was long and dark and tangled. His foul face was round and squashy looking. The eyes were tiny black holes. The nose was small, but the mouth was huge. It spread right across the face, almost ear to ear, and it had lips that were like two gigantic purple frankfurters, lying one on top of the other. Craggedy yellow teeth stuck out between the two purple frankfurter lips, and rivers of spit ran over his chin. Ugh. It was not in the least difficult to believe that this ghastly brute ate men, women, and children every night. The Blood Butler, still holding the BFG by the arm, was examining the rows and rows of bottles. "You and your pibbling bottles," he shouted. "What is you putting in them?" "Nothing that would interest you," the BFG answered. "You is only interested in guzzling human beings." "And you is as dotty as a dog swaller," cried the Blood Butler. Soon the Blood Butler would be coming back, Sophie told herself, and he was bound to search the tabletop. But she couldn't possibly jump off the table. It was 12 feet high. she'd break a leg. Pardon me. The Schnoz Cumber, although it was thick as a perambulator, was not going to hide her if the Blood Butler picked it up. She examined the chewed-off end. It had large seeds in it, in the middle, each one as big as a melon. They were embedded in soft, slimy stuff. Taking care to stay out of sight, Sophie reached forward and scooped away half a dozen of these seeds. This left a hole in the middle of the Schnoz Cumber large enough for her to crouch in, so long as she rolled herself up into a little ball. She crawled into it. It was a wet and slimy hiding place. But what it did, it matter if it was going to save her from being eaten. The Blood Butler and the BFG were coming back toward the table now. The BFG was nearly fainting with fear. Any moment, he was telling himself, Sophie would be discovered and eaten. Suddenly, the Blood Butler grabbed the half-eaten Schnoz Cumber. The BFG stared at the bare table. Sophie, where is you? He thought desperately. You cannot possibly be jumping off that high table. So where is you hiding, Sophie? So this is the filthsome, rotsome glubbage you is eating, boomed the Blood Butler, holding up the partly eaten Schnoz Cumber. You must be cockles to be guzzling such rub squash. For a moment, the Blood Butler seemed to have forgotten about his search for Sophie. The BFG decided to lead him further off the track. That is the scrumdiddlyumptious Schnoz Cumber. I is guzzling it gleefully every night and day. Is you never trying a Schnoz Blood Butler? Human beans is juicier, the Blood Butler said. You is talking rummy tot, the BFG said, growing braver by the second. He was thinking that if only he could get the Blood Butler to take one bite of the repulsive vegetable, the sheer foulness of its flavor would send him bellowing out of the cave. I is happy to let you sample it, the BFG went on. But please, when you see how truly glumptuous it is, do not be guzzling the whole thing. Leave me a little snitchet for my supper. The Blood Butler stared suspiciously with small piggy eyes at the Schnoz Cumber. Sophie crouched inside the chewed-off end and began to tremble all over. You is not switch fiddling me, is you? Said the Blood Butler. Never, cried the BFG passionately. Take a bite, and I am positive you will be shouting, Oh, how scrumdiddlyumptious this wonderverg is. The BFG could see the greedy Blood Butler's mouth beginning to water more than ever at the prospect of extra food. Vegetables is very good for you, he went on. It is not healthsome always to be eating meaty things. Just this once, the Blood Butler said. I is going to taste these rotsome eats of yours. But I is warning you that if it is filthsome, I is smashing it over your sludgy little head. He picked up the Schnoz Cumber, began raising it on its long journey to its mouth. Some 50 feet up in the air, Sophie wanted to scream, Don't, but that would have been an even more certain death. Crouching among the slimy seeds, she felt herself being lifted up and up and up. Suddenly there was a crunch as the Blood Butler bit a huge hunk off the end. Sophie saw his yellow teeth clamping together a few inches from her head. Then there was utter darkness. She was in his mouth. She caught a whiff of the evil-smelling breath. It stank of bad meat. She waited for the teeth to go crunch once more. She prayed she would be killed quickly. Youch! Roared the Blood Butler. Ugh! And then he spat. All the great lumps of Schnoz Cumbers that were in his mouth, all as well as Sophie, went shouting out across the cave. If Sophie had struck the stony wall of the cave, she would most certainly have been killed. Instead, she hit the soft folds of the BFG's black cloak hanging against the wall. She dropped to the ground, half stunned. She crawled under the hem of the cloak, and there she crouched. You little swine bugler, roared the Blood Butler. You little pig swiller. He rushed at the BFG and smashed what was left of the Schnoz Cumber over his head. Fragments of the filthy vegetable splashed all over the cave. You is not loving it? The BFG asked innocently, rubbing his head. Loving it? Yelled the Blood Butler. That is the most disgustorous taste that is ever clutching my teeth. You must be buggles to be swallowing sludge like that. Every night you could be galloping off happy as a hamburger and gobbling juicy human beans. Eating human beings is wrong and evil, the BFG said. It is guzzly and glumptuous, shouted the Blood Butler. And tonight I is galloping off to Chile to swabble a few human chili beans. Is you wishing to know why I is choosing Chile? I is not wishing to know anything, the BFG said, very dignified. I is choosing Chile, the Blood Butler said, because I is fed up with the taste of Eskimos. It is important I have plenty of cold eats in this scuttling hot weather, and the next coldest thing to an Eskimo is a chili bean. Human beans from Chile is very chilly. Horrible, the BFG said. You ought to be ashamed. Other giants is all saying they's wanting to gallop off to England tonight to guzzle school childlers. The Blood Butler said, I is very fond indeed of English school chidlers. They have a nice inky booky flavor. Perhaps I will change my mind and go to England with them. You is disgusting, the BFG said. And you is an insult to the giant people, shouted the Blood Butler. You is not fit to be a giant. You is a squinky little squiddler. You is a pibbling little pipsqueak. You is a cream puffnut. With that, the horrible bottling giant strode out of the cave. The BFG ran to the cave entrance and quickly rolled up the stone back into place. Sophie? He whispered. Sophie? Where is you, Sophie? Sophie emerged from under the hem of the black cloak. I'm here, she said. The BFG picked her up and held her tenderly in the palm of his hand. Oh, I is so happy to be finding you all in one lump, he said. I was in his mouth, Sophie said. You was what? Cried the BFG. Sophie told him what happened. And there I was telling him to eat the filthsome Schnoz Cumbers, and you all the time was inside of it. BFG cried. Not much fun, Sophie said. Just look at you, you poor little chidler, cried the BFG. You was all covered in Schnoz Cumber and giant spit. He set about cleaning her up as best he could. I is hating those other giants more now than ever. Now, he said. You know what I should like? What? Sophie said. I should like to find a way of disappearing them, every single one. I'd be glad to help you, Sophie said. Let's see if I can think of a way of doing it. The next chapter is called Frobscottle and Whiz Poppers. See you tomorrow.